Without further ado, join me in welcoming Susan Meissner.
Thanks, everybody. I'm sorry I'm late. I was missing a key ingredient to be able to log in, but I got it. So now I'm here, and we'll try and make up for the lost time by just getting right into what you guys want to talk about tonight. Yolanda, we're hashing out what we should chat about for your session tonight. And I really am available to you all for any questions you might have about anything related to this wonderful industry that we're working in. I thought I would share with you some hints about collaborating, because that was my most recent project, was a collaborative novel with Christina McMorris and Ariel Lahan. And I learned quite a bit about writing collaboratively. So we can talk about that if you would like to. I do have a PowerPoint that I can share with a few slides about what made, I think, our collaboration work. But if you have questions and you would rather spend the time we have together asking me anything about anything, we can do that too. So what would you guys like to do?
She's an expert on collaboration already. You know, she's already she has her PowerPoint, but she's like, hey, let's do what the audience wants to do. So
well, the thing is I don't know how many people are going to be thinking about collaborating, how many of your attendees are actually authors who might be collaborating. So I just want to make sure that I give you the most of me for what you want to do. So
we have some votes for collaboration in the chat.
Do you? Okay.
Yes. So.
Okay. All right, well, that's what we'll do then. So if you give me a second, I'm just going to pivot to my screen. I'm going to share my screen with you. And I am by no means an expert on collaborating. It's just that when we worked on this project together, it was kind of a new thing for all of us. And the thing I learned most about the process was it doesn't want to come. It doesn't. Goodness sakes! Now it doesn't want to advance. Well, goodness, people, it's. Okay. It won't advance. It won't advance, and I'm frozen. Oh my goodness.
See, there we have it.
All right, let me see if it'll. I'm trying to see if it'll advance the slides. Oh, there we go. It wasn't going to move there for a moment. Okay, finally. Okay, so I've entitled this Partners and Pages, and these are just 6 tips for what I feel was a great collaboration. And when you collaborate with another writer, sometimes it's an anthology, and that means you're each writing your own separate thing, and it's going to be bound together in one volume. And you aren't really relying on anybody else to get your work done. It's just you writing your piece, and then the other people, as part of the anthology, will write their pieces, and then somebody puts it all together. But when you're collaborating on a novel, that means if you took the bylines off of the book cover, it would seem like just one person wrote it. So you've got, depending on how many people are collaborating, for us, it was 3 people. You have a trio of writers writing as if they're one person, like one brain put it together. And which is different, because as you know, if you're a writer, most of what we do is in isolation. Usually when you're writing a book, it's just you in your room or office or wherever you can find a quiet place to write. And you're producing this work on your own. And then you have an editor to help you, maybe a critique partner or a critique group, but you're doing the work. No one else is writing it for you or with you. You're just doing it. But collaborating means you've got different people with different skills coming together to produce one thing. It's like 3 bakers coming together to produce one cake. And it's not like one person's doing the frosting and one person's doing the rosettes. You're all making the entire cake. So these are some tips that helped me, and I realized after the fact that this is how we were able to pull it off. And the main thing is to always remember that the story is king. This is actually really good advice when you're working solo too, is to always remember that every decision that you make about your book is for the good of the story. I write fiction, so everything I'm going to be telling you about this collaborative process is through the lens of writing fiction. And when you're writing fiction, it's a story, you're telling a story. And every decision then has to be for the good of the story. You're always going to come to any kind of project with your personal preferences. And it doesn't mean you have to set them entirely aside. It just means your personal preferences aren't the most important thing. The story is preeminent. And if you can keep that in mind, it does make every decision you make after that more, I would say, easier, bearable. Because if you come up against a hurdle with your collaborative writer and you ask yourself, if I bend here, can the story stay king? And if it can, then you'll be okay. It's all really about being flexible, which is actually pretty good advice for almost any kind of relationship you're in, is if you make the relationship the most important thing. You know, can you bend? And will the relationship still stay preeminent? Then that's usually a good thing. And so the question to ask then is, what does the story want? I know what I want in this situation. So you come to a hurdle, you come to a place in the story where you're not getting along, you can't decide what to do. If you ask yourself, what does the story want, and make the decision based on the good of the story, usually you can get past those hurdles. The second thing is, and this picture is a picture of a whole bunch of highways coming together. And that is that there's more than one way to write a book. And the three of us came to this project when we had wings. We had all written books before. I've written a bunch. Ariel has written some. Christina has written some. So we all know how to write a book. So, and we all write them differently. And they're all great books, right? So there's more than one way to write a book. Your way is not the only way. It may not even be the best way. It's the best way for you, but it may not be the best way uniformly for everybody. So again, you need to ask yourself, you know, what part of my routine can I relax here so that I can work with these other people who have a different way of writing? I like to outline. I don't outline. I wouldn't say my outlines are comprehensive, but I like to have a roadmap of where I'm going. And I usually make a bullet point list of where I think the story is going to go. Other people like to write by the seat of their pants. And the three of us do not plot the same way. One of us likes to use Scrivener, one of us doesn't. One of us likes to write in the wee hours, the other one doesn't. And so just realizing that your way of writing a book may not be their way is a good thing to realize. Because in the end, what you want is a great book. And all of those ways can produce a great book. So I think the key here is just realizing that your way works for you, their way works for them. And again, remember the first one, point number one is the story is king. So what's most important is not sticking to a routine that works for you. The most important thing is making sure the story can stay preeminent, especially when you can bend from your routine and still come up with a great story. Now, the third one is to choose your battles. And I liken this to parenting. Not every thing that you go through with your children is a field to die on, right? And you don't want to bring a big shiny sword to every battle because you'll end up, I think, not liking the project anymore. You may grow to hate the book that you're writing, and you certainly don't want to grow to hate the people that you're writing with. You know, you want to be able to still love the story and love the people when you come to the end of it. So I would say decide which of the things that you think about the book are most important to you. And I'm not saying become a doormat upon which every other writer can walk upon. But when you choose your battles, you know what I mean. It's deciding this is something that really matters to me. I feel like if I bent on here, I'd be compromising the story. And actually, you don't need to bring a sword at all. It's really good to remember that when you're coming to a place that feels like a field of battle, that what you're really doing is coming to a place where it's a round table. It's a table where you need to have maybe a tough discussion about what needs to happen. You don't need to bring the sword. It's best to have conversations like that with care and respect, and to understand that the reason why there's tension right now is you both feel like what you have to say is important. And so I would say make sure that when you go to a table like that, where you have to have a hard conversation that might be contentious, is to remember that you've chosen this to make this important. And it's it has more weight to you than perhaps other things, those are the things you really want to spend these kinds of discussions about. Hope that makes sense. You don't need the sword. So number 4 is to plan for setbacks. So we thought we could, produce the book in a set amount of time. And of course, life happens when you're busy making other plans. And there were delays, there were complications with our own solo works, there were family issues that came up. So I would say if you're going to collaborate with anybody on any kind of project, whether it's a book or anything, it's just plan for margin. If you think it's going to take 8 months to write this book together, plan for a year. You can thank us later because it might actually take longer than you think. And if you happen to finish early, well, that's never a bad thing. And so I would just say, build some margin into the schedule. This 5th one, I think, is probably good advice for almost any relationship you find yourself in. Certainly if you're in a writing relationship with another writer, but almost every other relationship you have with other human beings, this is really good advice, and that is to listen, listen, listen. And listening is different than hearing. Hearing is just applying your auditory skills, but listening is getting to the heart of what the other person is saying. And if all you're doing is hearing, then you might not be opening yourself up to the fact that they might be right. They could be wrong, actually. So you listen because you want to hear what they're saying, and you're listening because they may be right, and you're listening because if they're wrong, you want to be able to gently tell them why you think they are. And you can't do that if you haven't listened to them, if you don't understand them, if you haven't affirmed what they're saying. And affirming what they're saying shows them that you've been listening. And so I would say you could apply that to almost any relationship you have, is to listen, listen, listen. Don't just merely hear, so that you can not only find out perhaps that they were right all along and you've listened, so now you know that, or that they really are not quite right about something, but you need to be able to explain why. And having listened, you will be able to do it. And then this last one is adapting is easier than you think. These are moving boxes. I just moved from San Diego to the Pacific Northwest. Yes, I know it rains all the time here. And I left San Diego where it hardly rains at all, but we love it here. It's beautiful. And the reason why it's so pretty is because of all that rain. But moving is adapting. Moving is transition. And it's hard work, but it's not impossible. And adapting and adjusting is actually easier than you think. And a lot of it is just keeping your eye on the goal. The goal is to produce a great story, and that's what you're after. And so, yes, there's going to be difficulties along the way. There's going to be times where you're going to have to defer. There are times where I wanted something to go into the book, and the other two thought it didn't need to go. I said, okay, I deferred. They thought it was for the good of the story. I trusted them, and I let it go, and it really was okay. Sometimes you have to omit a chapter that you've written. The chapter's really good, but for the good of the story, the other two think, well, we probably don't need that chapter. We can get to the action faster if we don't have that chapter. And it's always hard to let go of something that you've created, but it actually is easier to adapt than you think. And part of finding out how easy it is to do something is to start trying it, start trying to adjust and adapt. And not only you find it easier, the more you do something, I think the easier it becomes for you to have it be part of second nature. So those are my tips for writing a collaborative novel. And I guess some of them will also work for your relationships too. So now we can go to questions, and it can be about this. It can be about anything that is of interest to you, writing related, book related, about writing in general. Anything you'd like to ask, I'm here for you.
Thank you, Susan. That was excellent, working with people. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to come off of mute to ask. Or, we have a question in the chat. So Angela Shelton asked, which of these potential issues did you struggle with the most during this collaboration?
I guess for me, it was probably not building in enough time in the margins for setbacks, because we were all working on our solo works at the same time too. And I'm one of those people that I always turn in everything on time. I've always been on time. And that's just part of who I am. I think my mom raised me to be punctual. So it's really, really hard for me not to be on time. And we were late on some things, and that was hard for me, because it just kind of goes against, like my DNA. Did it matter in the big picture? Not really. Everything turned out fine. The publisher just gave us some wiggle room. We didn't have as much time on the back end, for revising. When you turn something in at the last minute, you don't really have as much time to let something sit and marinate for a little bit. I would have liked that, but did it turn out okay? It did. So in the end, everything was fine, but I think I would have saved myself some stress if we had just built more time into the margins.
I like that. Yes, building extra time. Another question from Chris is, what prompted you to collaborate?
We actually had a publisher, Harper Muse, come to us and actually we had the same literary agent, come to our agent and say, hey, do you think these 3 writers would be interested in writing a collaborative novel together? And I think, you see more and more collaborative novels now. It didn't used to be a thing. And I'm not sure like who started it, but they're starting to pop up all over the place. And sometimes you'll see it with celebrities, like maybe a celebrity doesn't really have the same writing chops as a writer. So you'll see like, trying to think, like Dolly Parton just wrote one with James Patterson, although maybe she can write, she's very literary minded. So you'll see collaborations like that. Hazel Gaynor and Heather Webb have collaborated. Beatrice Williams, Lauren Willig, and Karen White have collaborated. There's a new one coming out next year by Kate Quinn and Janie Chang. They've collaborated on a novel. And so I think maybe Harper Muse was thinking, the collaborative novel seems to be a thing people really like. And it doesn't put as much responsibility on one writer. I really only had to write 1/3 of a book, which is kind of nice when you're writing your own things too. So they came to us and said, would the 3 of you consider writing a novel together? We'd really like something World War II related, because when they came to us, it was right before the pandemic, like just weeks before the pandemic. And the World War II genre was still quite popular. And we said, yes, we said we would. We were already good friends, and we already appreciated each other's work. And so all we had to do then was come up with a premise, a backdrop, a historical event, and we were off and running.
Sorry, I keep hitting mute. I believe that answers the next question by Sarah, who she had asked, how did this collaboration come about? Did your publisher put you ladies together, or did you choose each other? So I believe your answer addressed that. We have another question by Chris, who says, are the benefits of collaboration worth it? Will you collaborate again?
We are all 3 of us, if the chance to write again came up, I know we would all seriously consider it. It would have to be like, we just can't fit it in because of other deadlines, because we really, really enjoyed working together. And we just had the best time these last couple of weeks with the book's release. And I think there's something to be said by collaborating with someone who's already a friend. I don't know what it would be like to collaborate with somebody who you're thrown together with, who you really don't have any history with. I don't know what that would be like. I think part of the reason why we were successful was that we did have not only, a relationship as colleagues, but we were also friends. And now at the end of it, we're even better friends. I think it might be harder. I could be wrong about this, but I think it might be harder to collaborate with somebody who you just know nominally, because it's kind of writing a book is a very personal, intimate thing. And to do that with somebody you barely know, I think that might be a little difficult just because of what you're trying to produce together. So in that respect, I think it makes sense to consider if the opportunity to collaborate comes your way, how well do you know the other person?
That's an excellent point. It's kind of like that trust game, where you have
Yes,
to fall back. I am not falling back unless I
right.
know you. Right?
Yeah, right.
Right. That is awesome. Let me see if there are any other questions in the chat. Okay. I don't see any questions from the audience right now, so I am going to take this opportunity to ask one of my questions.
Okay.
So, Susan, can you tell us about some other projects you have in the works?
Sure. I do have a book coming out in April 2023, and the covers is really pretty. It's called Only the Beautiful, and it's a book about an event in the 20th century that we don't hear much about anymore. It's called the eugenics movement. And the reason why you don't hear much about it anymore is it's an idea that is no longer in vogue. You don't hear much about it because it's not being implemented the way it was back then. And that's a good thing. It was not a very good idea. But what it was there was a bunch of anthropologists and sociologists and biologists and sociologists, medical doctors, scientists, who all thought that if we only improved the gene pool, if we had healthier, happier children, we would have a healthier, happier society. And so the only way really to do that, though, was to prevent people who you thought weren't perfect enough to have children from having children, which is what happened here in the US. In 30 different states, and my home state of California was the worst. They forcibly sterilized more people than any other state. And it was eugenic laws, legislation that allowed the states to do that. And it was all in the name of race betterment. They actually called it that. They called it race betterment. And so you had people deciding who was perfect and who was not, and who should be having children and who should not. And that ideology at its worst is what we saw with the final solution in Nazi Germany. They were using eugenic thinking for all of their terrible, terrible programs and schemes. And after World War II, when we saw what eugenic thinking looks like at its absolute worst, you started seeing these eugenic laws coming off the books. So now no state has eugenic laws on their books. Some of them took longer to get them off than others. California didn't take their eugenic laws off the books until the late 1960s. And I believe North Carolina still had eugenic laws on the books until the 1990s. But you don't see it now. And I'm afraid that a movement like that you don't hear about anymore is the kind of movement to be forgotten. And whatever we forget, we tend to repeat. So I think it's good to keep in our minds the lessons of the past. And so this book is about two women impacted by that movement, one in California in the 1930s and another in occupied Vienna during World War II. And it's not a hopeless book. It's a book about a hard topic, to be sure. I don't sugarcoat anything, but it is a book with, I believe, hope infused in the pages. And that book comes out in April.
And you said it's called Only the Beautiful?
Only the Beautiful. Mm-hmm.
Wow, thank you. If anyone wants to be notified of that release, is there a website or email that they can have?
Sure, if they want to go on my website, which is just SusanMeissnerAuthor.com, they can sign up for my newsletter. I only send it out 4 times a year, but I do always let people know right before a new book is coming out that a new book is coming out. So that's an easy way to be notified when this book comes out, is the newsletter. And it's easy to sign up. It's just your email, and I don't give email addresses away to anybody. And it really is just 4 times a year.
Okay, no, that's perfect. And I'll put it in the chat. SusanMeissnerAuthor.com. So if anyone wants to know when Only the Beautiful is released, you can sign up there. So I have another question, Susan. Hold on, let me make sure that I'm not missing anything, so I'm not a question hog. If anyone has any questions, jump in. So when you were talking about this book, and I like how you described Only the Beautiful as, hope infused in the pages. So, despite it having a somber topic, there's still hope. But do you ever read your own books and you feel that emotion on the pages? Like, I feel like, there was one book, just to give you an example, I was writing a scene and I was rereading it, and my husband comes in and I have tears coming all down my face. And he says, why are you crying? And I said, oh, this is so sad. And he goes, but you wrote it. You knew what was about to happen. And so I was like, this must mean that this is a pretty good scene. So do you feel that way sometimes when you proofread, before going into print, like your book pulls that emotion out of you? And if you as the writer have that, emotional reaction, what it will mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I have had that happen. I think it happens to me as I'm writing it. Like I'm writing it for the first time, and it's affecting me the same way it's going to affect a reader who also reads it for the first time. I would say I've had more moments like that during the actual act of creation. When I'm reading it again, second, third, fourth, 10th time, it seems to me that I'm less moved. Not every time. I think there have been a couple of times where I have felt that same thickening in your throat, and you can tell that you're going to lose it. But most of the time for me, it's at that moment of creation when something is happening that just really truly gets to the heart of who we are as people and the things that matter most to us. But yeah, I don't read my books after they're published. And I don't think I'm the only author. I've met a bunch of author friends who don't do that either.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it would be like to read one of my books, like, 3 or 4 years down the road. I do wonder what would that be like, but I don't know if I'm brave enough to do it.
Yeah, no, I don't read my book after they are published either. So I'm always reading proofs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no final format. So we have another question from Sarah Hanks, who says,
oh, Sarah, thank you. I think she was the one that helped me get the information I needed to get onto the Zoom. So thank you, Sarah. Okay.
Oh, thank
Yes.
you, Sarah. Collaboration. You see
That's
how that works? Sarah, what was your favorite book to write? I mean, Sarah asked, what was your favorite book to write?
That's always such a hard question because it's almost always the one I've just written. So like, it feels like right now, Only the Beautiful is my favorite or will be my favorite. But, every year it seems like I change my mind. I do know that there are a couple of books in my past that I think were pivotal for me in that they signaled a change, and a good one for me. Like it was like I was refining my place and figuring out like my lane. And one is The Shape of Mercy, which I wrote a whole bunch of years ago in 2008. But it was my first historical fiction. I had been writing contemporaries and mysteries up to that point, but The Shape of Mercy was my first dual timeline historical fiction. And I didn't set out to change my lane. It's just I wrote it because I had this idea for it. And I just really liked how it came together, and it got some really great reviews. And I thought, oh, I probably should have been doing this the whole time. I'm probably meant to write historical fiction. And so that one was a favorite for a long time. My mom still loves that one. And the other one is The Fall of Marigolds. And again, it was a transitional book for me because I was moving out of the inspirational marketplace to the general marketplace with that one. And so I was changing lanes again, not so much genre, but just marketplace. And it was a pretty big migration. And so, I was afraid. I didn't know if I was making the right choice. I didn't know if people would like me in the general market. And so I wrote that book, and I found out that the way I write is appreciated in the general market. I wasn't sure if it would be. And so that book is one of my favorites too, for that reason, in that it kind of showed me who I was and where I'm meant to write. And it also speaks about themes that are really important to me. And that is that love is worth the risk. If you love anything, you risk being hurt. I think C.S. Lewis told us that, because if you love someone, and we're all mortal, if you love someone, you risk being hurt. But that does not mean it's not worth it. Love is what makes the hardest edges of life bearable. And that book is all about that theme. And so for that reason too, it's one of my favorites.
Wow. Thank you. I want to point out something before I forget. Brian pointed out to everyone that Only the Beautiful is already listed on Amazon, so you can add it to your wish list.
Yes.
So I wanted to make sure I noted that.
That's a great idea.
So thank you, Brian. Chris says, can you describe the kind of author who would be ideal for collaboration, or perhaps the opposite, who would not do so well?
I think it's smart to consider, if you're going to have a writing partner, is you can't be so disparate in the way you approach the project that you're always going to be butting heads. I think it's smart to think about, there's a word for it. I guess compatibility is maybe the best word. I probably am not meant to work alongside every kind of personality. And like, for example, I know that on the Enneagram wheel, which is a personality wheel, that I'm a 2. And I know that sometimes 2s might not work well with maybe one of the other numbers, because 2s, I'm notoriously a people pleaser. And I don't know all the other Enneagram numbers as well as I know my own, but I think there are different personalities that if you are one of the other numbers that clashes with a 2, that might not be the best writing situation. Is it insurmountable? No, I feel like anybody can work with anybody if you just learn to adapt and be respectful and all of that. But I think just for ease, is to consider your strengths and your weaknesses in light of the other person's strengths and weaknesses. And that's another argument for at least knowing the other person, at least as a colleague, if not as a friend.
That's good advice. Back to that whole trust thing, right? So Susan's featured book for the festival, we just wanted to remind you of her featured book, which is currently available, which you can purchase in our bookstore, is When We Had Wings. And this was the collaborative project she mentioned. Do we have any other questions for Susan? So you've written 21 novels.
Yes.
Susan, I'm interested. When did you write your first novel? So
yeah, I thought about it for a long time before I actually summoned the courage to give it a try, because what happened when I graduated from high school was I knew I loved to write, but I was afraid to make it my career because I was afraid that I would grow to hate it. I was young and naive. I saw people coming home from the work week, tired on Fridays, loving the weekend, hating Mondays, And I thought, if that's what writing will turn into for me, if I make it my job, then I'm going to keep it my hobby and do something else. And what I've learned since then, and what I tell young people now, is you can do the thing you love as a job and still love it. It might exhaust you. You might still want the weekends, but you're not going to grow to hate it just because it's your job. And I didn't realize that. And I think it was much, much later in my life, I heard the quote by Confucius that if you pick a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Not entirely true, but I understand what the quote means. And so I did not major in creative writing. I didn't take a whole lot of writing classes in college. I took hardly any writing classes in college because my scores were high. My SAT scores were high. And so I tested out a lot of those, like freshman comp and all of that. So if I had thought about it, I would have majored in writing or history or English or mass comm or something. I was an education major, which is fine. But what I really wanted to do with my life was write. And that's not what I did. So my first writing job wasn't until I was in my mid-30s, and I wrote for a newspaper. I did not have a journalism degree. They hired me because it was the middle of nowhere, Minnesota, and the applicant pool was really shallow, and they needed a part-time reporter, and I was able to convince them that I could write. And because I was finally doing what I was wired to do all along, I learned really fast how to write like a journalist. And before long, I was getting assignments. I was getting special features to write. I was being made editor for special features. I had my own column, and then I was made editor of one of the smaller newspapers that this larger newspaper owned. And that's not how wonderful I am. All that means is I was finally doing what I was wired to do all along. So now I'm in my 40s, and this hankering to write a novel that I've had since I was a teenager in high school, it's haunting me, keeping me up at night, because I realize I've got to give this a try. I have to try writing a novel because I'll regret if I never even tried. So I did. I was 41 years old, wrote my first novel, didn't know a soul, nobody knew me, didn't have an agent. And I wrote a book called Why the Sky is Blue, which is now out of print, but you can get it on Kindle. And God was nice to me. I got a contract at Harvest House Publishers, who published that book. So I was 42 years old when that book was published. It was my first, and I'd been thinking about it for over 20 years. So all that is to say is that you can, just because you put a dream on the back burner doesn't mean it's dead. You can always resurrect a dream that you've put on the back burner. And the other thing, it's never too late to try what you've always wanted to try, really, because you might find out that you were gifted to do it all along. You just didn't know it.
That is so inspiring. So thank you for sharing that. We have a question from Brian Lawrence. He said, did you have any branding issues when you switched genres?
Yeah, I worried about that too. I wondered, are the people that have found me in the Christian marketplace, are they going to follow me over? And will it be like starting over? And will I lose the readers that I have? And what I found is because my inspirational fiction was very subtle, the faith threads in my books were very subtle, I was already appealing to the kind of reader that just wants a great story, and they don't particularly want a message-driven story with Christian characters. They really do want something a little more broad. And so I think the readers that I found, which weren't that many, I was never a bestseller in the inspirational market. I think my readers came with me to the general market. And I think it's because they were already reading in the general market, just like I was. And so I didn't have to change who I was. I didn't have to lose a bunch of readers. I gained a whole lot more. That's been nice. But I didn't have to change me. I didn't have to change who I was. I've never felt pressured to include anything in my books that I would feel uncomfortable writing about. I don't have to use language in my books that I don't use as a person just to fit into this market. The thing about the general market is it's general. So that means anything goes, including not saying words that I don't use. You know what I mean? So I've been pleasantly surprised that that I've found a whole bunch of new readers, that I haven't had to compromise on who I am, and I've been able to maintain what I feel is my Judeo-Christian values in every book that I write. Now, whatever I write that might be considered faith-based is more subtle than ever. But, you know, I liken it to the book of Esther in the Old Testament, which is a fabulous story, and God is never mentioned, not even once. And that to me tells me that there is room in the world for literature that is just a fantastic story with values that matter, and let people draw from those stories what they will. And if anybody wants to get to know me as a person, they'll certainly find out who I am by getting to know me. And that's when I can be more of a person of faith. I feel like I'm the Christian, not my books. And I've always kind of felt that way, that a book can't be a Christian, only a person can. And so that's the long answer. The short answer is I did not have to lose my brand when I transitioned.
JPC Allen asked, what was the most surprising thing you found in your research for your latest novel?
The most surprising thing. I think for me, because the eugenics movement, you don't hear much about it anymore at all. I was surprised that it was still being practiced after World War II, because we saw the camps, when the camps were liberated, those concentration camps, and we finally saw what race betterment meant to, the Nazi war machine. You would have thought all eugenic practices would have stopped, and they didn't. Some did pretty quick after that, but a lot didn't. And this idea that someone else can decide who is perfect and who is not, and who should be having children and who should not, that thinking that it persisted after World War II, after we saw what happened in Europe, that surprised me.
We have another question. And this was sent by accident as a direct message, but it's okay if I read it out loud. I'm not violating any privacy, just so everyone knows, okay? The question is from Julie, who said, did you receive rejections when you first started writing?
I did. I probably did not receive as many as I have read other, like at the time, each one felt painful and personal. And I didn't relish any of it, but I kept all those rejection letters. I think it's because I don't know why we keep them, but I kept them, I guess, to remind myself of where I was and the road I've taken and all the different turns that road has taken. And there's probably only 10 or 12. And I've heard from people who submitted to maybe 50, 100 publishing houses or agencies. And so in hindsight, a dozen rejections is not this. It's not the same as having 100. And my hat goes off to anyone who keeps at it after getting 100 rejections. But it's the right thing to do. It is absolutely the right thing to do, to keep trying no matter how many rejections you get, because every rejection you get is that much closer to the one that's going to say, we want your work. So I feel like the best thing you can do with a rejection letter, or rejection, even if it's just a rejection email that's not specific, is number one, don't take it personal if you can. And then understand that a lot of times what gets rejected is not your work so much as what you're proposing at the time, because some things, the timing is just not right. And it might just not be right for that publisher. Like if you write a book about nurses in the Philippines serving in World War II, which I just wrote about, and you pitch to a publishing company that's about to publish a book like that, they're going to reject you. And they might not take the time to tell you, we already have a book like that coming out in 6 months. They might just say it's not the right time for us, or they might just send you a form rejection. You don't know. But the thing is, it could just be a matter of timing, not so much what you've written. So each rejection, you kind of need to figure out what it is that they don't want, because it might just be they don't want a particular project that you've pitched. They might like you as a writer quite a lot, but they can't take you just because they like your writing. They have to take what you've written. And if they don't have a market for it, then they won't. So the best thing to do with a rejection is to try and learn from it, see if there's any kernel of truth that you can use to keep on and try for the next one.
Well, we have our final question from the Faith and Fellowship Book Festival co-founder, Cindy Thompson,
Cindy,
who says, were the nurses in When We Had Wings based on real people?
Yeah, they were actually. They were known as the Angels of Bataan. They were dubbed that by the sailors and soldiers who were also left in the Philippine Islands when General MacArthur retreated. And a lot of people know what happened to the soldiers and sailors. They were marched up the Bataan Peninsula on the Bataan Death March, and it was a horrible event. The nurses were not. They were taken into Manila and they were incarcerated in prisoner of war camps. And so their experience was a bit different from the get-go. But because they were military, uniformed, female nurses, they were really the first American military female prisoners of war. And what they did is there were about 60 Army nurses, a dozen Navy nurses, and some Filipina nurses working for the United States Army. So there's about 80 of them. What they did was quite remarkable because they were put into these internment camps, which were awful. They were terrible. And there was never enough to eat. There was disease everywhere. There was poor sanitation. You can imagine how bad it was. And these nurses continued to do what they'd been sent to the Philippines to do as military nurses. They nursed people. So while all the other prisoners are just trying to survive, these nurses are doing that too, but they're still nursing people. They're still trying to soothe people with fevers and treat beriberi and help people get through malaria with nothing. They weren't given hardly any medicines at all. And so the fact that so few people know about these nurses, we thought that's got to change. They were so incredibly brave, and they endured 3.5 years of prison camps before General MacArthur did come back. He promised, I shall return, and he did come back, but it was 3.5 long years later under the most austere of conditions. And they were just the most remarkable women. So yes, they were based on real people. Our nurses are fictional, but the experiences that our fictional nurses have, those experiences are all pretty much real for the real nurses.
Well, with that, our time is up. Susan, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure just sitting here listening to you. Thank you for sharing those tips, your stories, and just such wonderful inspiration.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. We appreciate it. We're getting a round of applause.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And again, we just want to remind everyone that Susan's book is in our bookstores. So make sure you go check that out. And also Only the Beautiful, right? Only the Beautiful is available on Amazon, where anyone who's interested in that can put that into your wish list. And the release date is April.
April 18. Mhm.
April 18th. Same day as tax day.
That's right.
So you want to buy it before you have to pay your taxes. How about
There you go. So you can, yeah, so you can do something fun on that day.
yeah. So all right, I am going to stop the recording.